November 19th, 1942. You're Obergefreiter Hans Weber of the 24th Panzer Division, and you're freezing to death in a bombed-out apartment building in Stalingrad. 3 months ago, you were part of the most powerful army in human history, rolling across the Russian steppe like an unstoppable force. Now you're eating rats and burning furniture to stay warm. Your unit started the battle with 180 men. This morning, you counted 23. The rest are dead, wounded, or missing somewhere in the maze of rubble that used to be a city. You haven't had a hot meal in 2 weeks, and your ammunition is running so low that your sergeant has ordered you to make every shot count. But what really terrifies you isn't the cold, or the hunger, or even the Russian snipers picking off your friends one by one. It's the sound you heard this morning, the rumble of Soviet tanks coming from the west. Hundreds of them. And you're starting to realize that the German army that conquered Poland, France, and half of Europe might not be invincible after all. What Hans doesn't know is that he's about to witness the moment when Hitler's war machine doesn't just stall, it breaks completely. Because Stalingrad isn't just another battle. It's the place where the myth of German invincibility dies, and where the tide of World War II turns forever. Today, I'm going to tell you how a single city on the Volga River destroyed the most powerful military force the world had ever seen. Why Hitler's obsession with Stalingrad doomed his entire war effort, and how the battle that was supposed to end Soviet resistance instead ended Nazi Germany's dreams of empire. The German war machine that rolled into Russia in June 1941 was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Operation Barbarossa deployed 3.8 million men, 3,350 tanks, and 2,770 aircraft along an 1,800-mile front. It was the largest military operation in human history, and for the first 6 months, it looked unstoppable. German panzer divisions carved through Soviet defenses like hot knives through butter. Entire Soviet armies were surrounded and destroyed. By December 1941, German forces had captured Kiev, besieged Leningrad, and come within sight of Moscow's spires. Over 3 million Soviet soldiers had been killed or captured. But then, winter came, and the German advance stalled. The wehrmacht wasn't equipped for a Russian winter. Soldiers were still wearing summer uniforms when temperatures dropped to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Equipment froze, supply lines collapsed, and the quick victory Hitler had promised turned into a grinding war of attrition. By summer 1942, Hitler was desperate for a decisive victory. The German economy was straining under the weight of a two-front war. His allies were getting nervous. If Germany was going to win, it had to be soon. Hitler's plan for 1942 was called Operation Blue, a massive offensive aimed at capturing the oil fields of the Caucasus. But there was one problem. A city called Stalingrad sat on the Volga River, controlling the supply routes to the south. Originally, Stalingrad was supposed to be a secondary objective. But Hitler became obsessed with the city, partly because it bore Stalin's name. Taking Stalingrad would be a propaganda victory that would humiliate his greatest enemy. General Friedrich Paulus commanded the German 6th Army, the force tasked with capturing Stalingrad. Paulus was a staff officer, a planner, not a field commander. He'd never led troops in combat before, but Hitler trusted him to follow orders without question. The German assault on Stalingrad began on August 23, 1942, with a massive air raid that killed 40,000 civilians and turned much of the city into rubble. German commanders thought the bombing would break Soviet morale. Instead, it created the perfect defensive terrain. The rubble-filled streets became a maze of sniper nests, machine gun positions, and booby traps. Every building became a fortress. Every room had to be fought for separately. The German war machine, designed for rapid movement, found itself trapped in a nightmare of urban warfare. Soviet General Vasily Chuikov commanded the 62nd Army defending Stalingrad. Unlike Paulus, Zhukov was a fighter. His orders to his troops were simple. Every German soldier must be made to feel that he is living under the muzzle of a Russian gun. The fighting in Stalingrad was unlike anything seen in World War II. Battles were fought room by room, floor by floor, sometimes with enemies separated by a single wall. German soldiers would control the ground floor while Russians held the upper floors. Grenades were rolled down staircases like bowling balls. Private Anatoly Kozlov of the Soviet 13th Guards Division later wrote, "We fought for every staircase, every window, every pile of bricks. The Germans would take a building in the morning, and we'd take it back at night. Sometimes we'd fight for the same room 3 times in one day." The close quarters fighting neutralized many of Germany's technological advantages. Tanks were useless in the narrow streets. Artillery couldn't be used without hitting your own troops. The Luftwaffe couldn't provide effective support because friend and foe were too close together. Meanwhile, Hans Weber and his comrades were discovering that the German war machine had a fatal flaw. It was designed for short, decisive campaigns, not prolonged battles of attrition. German logistics were breaking down under the strain. By October, German forces controlled 90% of Stalingrad, but that last 10% might as well have been on the moon. Soviet defenders clung to a narrow strip along the Volga, supplied by boats that ran a gauntlet of German fire every night. But the real disaster was still to come. While German forces were grinding themselves to pieces in Stalingrad's ruins, Soviet Marshal Georgy Zhukov was planning the largest military operation in Russian history. Operation Uranus would encircle the entire German force. On November 19th, the same day Hans Weber was counting his surviving comrades, Soviet forces launched their counteroffensive. Over 1 million Soviet troops, supported by 1,400 tanks and 15,000 artillery pieces, smashed through the weak Romanian and Italian armies, protecting the German flanks. The German commanders saw it coming, but couldn't stop it. Their reserves were tied up in the city fighting. Their allies were demoralized and poorly equipped. Within 4 days, the entire German 6th Army, over 250,000 men, was surrounded. Hitler's response revealed how completely his judgment had been warped. Instead of ordering Paulus to break out, Hitler commanded him to hold his positions. "The 6th Army will hold its positions regardless of the danger of encirclement," he radioed. "Supply will be maintained by air." It was a fantasy. The Luftwaffe promised to deliver 500 tons of supplies per day to the trapped army. On their best day, they managed 120 tons. Most days, it was much less. German soldiers began starving, while their commanders promised relief that would never come. General Hermann Hoth tried to break through with a relief force, but his panzers were stopped just 30 miles from Stalingrad. The German war machine that had conquered most of Europe couldn't advance those final 30 miles to save its own soldiers. Inside the cauldron, conditions deteriorated rapidly. Hans Weber's diary entries tell the story. December 10th, no bread for 3 days, ate my leather belt. December 15th, found a dead horse, fought off the rats to get some meat. December 20th, can't feel my feet anymore. The German soldiers weren't just fighting the Red Army, they were fighting hunger, cold, disease, and despair. Typhus swept through their ranks. Frostbite claimed thousands. Men who had marched across Europe as conquerors were reduced to scavenging for scraps. On January 31st, Paulus finally surrendered what remained of his army. Of the 250,000 German soldiers who had been trapped, only 90,000 were still alive to be taken prisoner. Of those, fewer than 5,000 would ever see Germany again. Hans Weber wasn't one of them. His diary ends on January 15th. Can't write anymore. Hands too cold. If anyone finds this, tell my mother I tried to be brave. His body was found in the ruins of a factory, still clutching his rifle. The destruction of the 6th Army was more than just a military defeat. It was the moment when the German war machine revealed its fundamental weakness. The Wehrmacht had been designed for quick victories, not prolonged campaigns. When the war became a contest of endurance, Germany was doomed. The psychological impact was even greater than the military losses. For 3 years, German soldiers had believed they were invincible. Stalingrad shattered that myth. German morale never recovered from the shock. Meanwhile, Soviet industry was hitting its stride. Factories beyond the Urals were producing tanks, planes, and artillery at rates that dwarfed German production. The Soviet Union was becoming the arsenal of the East. Hitler himself was never the same after Stalingrad. The defeat broke something inside him. He became increasingly erratic, paranoid, and detached from reality. His generals began to lose faith in his leadership. The German war machine that had terrorized Europe had been built on the myth of invincibility. When that myth died in Stalingrad's ruins, the machine began to fall apart. Not all at once, but piece by piece, defeat by defeat. Hans Weber and his comrades paid the price for Hitler's obsession with a city that should have been bypassed. Their sacrifice wasn't heroic. It was pointless, the result of a dictator's wounded pride. But their deaths marked the beginning of the end for the regime that had sent them to die. Stalingrad didn't just change the course of World War II. It revealed the fundamental truth about Hitler's war machine. It looked invincible when everything went according to plan, but it was actually brittle. When faced with an enemy that refused to quit, it shattered like glass. If you found this story of how one battle changed everything as gripping as I did, make sure to subscribe to the channel and check out the videos on your screen right now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.